Young doctors want work-life balance. Older doctors say that's not the job. This is an article from the Wall Street Journal, and it is controversial as you might expect. There's a question dividing the medical practice right now. Is being a doctor a job or a calling? For decades, the answer was clear. Doctors accepted long hours and punishing schedules, believing it was their duty to sacrifice in the name of patient care. They did it knowing their colleagues prided themselves on doing the same. A newer generation of physicians, which is us, is questioning that culture, at times to the chagrin of their older peers. Nearly half of doctors report feeling some burnout, according to the AMA. Work-life balance and predictable hours shouldn't be at odds with being an MD, cite doctors who are pushing against what they view as outdated expectations of overwork. Dr. Kara Grace Leventhal, 40, is a hospitalist, a job that offers set hospital shifts, caring for patients, and the ability to clock out at a fixed time. Oftentimes as a hospitalist, you're working 7 days on, 7 days off, and you have fixed hours with regards to when you start and when you end. Changes in healthcare mean a growing number of physicians now work as employees at health systems and hospitals rather than in private practice. That's true. Ever since Obamacare, which is not terrible, it's not great, it has good things about it. I think it's a step in the right direction, although definitely far from perfect. It's much more difficult to run your own private practice. Electronic paperwork and other bureaucratic demands add to the stress and make the profession feel less satisfying, they say. More physicians are pursuing temporary work. That's why we've done so many reaction videos on people doing locum tenens now. This debate and its consequences will play out for years. In interviews with nearly 24 physicians, many said that medicine's workaholic culture was overdue for a correction. Others said when physicians are less committed to their work, their peers and overall quality of patient care can suffer. So those are the two opposing arguments. The main things here, overwork versus commitment. And we're going to come back to that. Physicians work an average of 59 hours a week, according to the AMA. Keep in mind that that's all physicians, but then the average for a neurosurgeon versus a family medicine doctor versus a plastic surgeon versus a radiologist is going to be a different number. Some higher, some lower than that number. And while the profession is well compensated, around $350K, when Leventhal started her job at Johns Hopkins in 2021, a superior told her that sick time could only be used in extreme circumstances, like you'd been in a car crash on the way to work. In Florida, while working with med students, Vaughn has been put off when they called up for reasons ranging from colds to bachelor parties. None of those would have been acceptable during his training, he says. Yeah, if you're calling out because of a bachelor party, I would agree. I'm not saying they're wrong in their desire for a work-life balance, but there was a time when the patient came first, he says. More young docs are joining healthcare systems or hospitals or larger physician groups. Among physicians under 35, only a third own practices, down from 44% in 2012. By comparison, 51% of those aged 45 to 55 are owners. They have more autonomy, but also increasing overhead costs. One of those overhead cost examples would be malpractice. Vaughn says that the premiums increased to $65,000 a year. They also spend far more time doing admin tasks now. One 2022 study found residents spent just 13% of their time in patient rooms, which is wild. We have seen a very strong correlation with burnout and charting and this administrative bloat. So things like the EHR, the electronic health record, or EMR, electronic medical record, those weren't designed to optimize for patient care. Those were designed to optimize for billing, to get more money through insurance and so on, making sure you code for everything. As an example, neurosurgeons have lower burnout rates than ED physicians. ED physicians on average work way fewer hours than neurosurgeons, but neurosurgeons are spending far less time charting. Also, the ED physicians, depending on their workplace, might have also highly irregular shifts. It is shift work, but it's not always 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. You might be 9 to 5 and then 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. and sometimes working overnight. Those are also important factors. For years, doctors referred to their work as a calling. Among some residents, that's now considered very triggering and offensive, says Katz. Okay, I hope people aren't saying that it's triggering and offensive to call it a calling. I understand the pushback when you say that, hey, it's a calling, you're able to get away with more as the employer, and it's not because you actually believe it's a calling, it's because you as the employer just want to squeeze out all the value you can from the residents. Money, right? And rather than hiring the mid-levels or other support staff that should be doing a lot of the work that residents are doing that's completely irrelevant to their future practice as an attending physician, They'd rather just work you harder because, hey, they're only paying a small amount since the government is subsidizing half your salary. Yeah, right here, it's code word for being taken advantage of, precisely. I still wouldn't call it triggering and offensive though. Today's cohort understandably feels more like widgets in a system and is inclined to use benefits such as sick time, he says, but doing so can pose challenges for patients who may end up with less consistent care. I don't think that's a very strong argument to say that people occasionally taking sick time a few times, a handful of times per year, is going to meaningfully decrease the consistency of care for a given individual. I'm a patient myself, and there are times when, I have a chronic illness since I was, 18? So 16 years now I've had this illness, and I'm seeing my gastroenterologist at least once a year, sometimes multiple times a year. Sometimes you get rescheduled, but it's not like, oh my God, now I don't have consistent care because something came up. In San Francisco, Dr. Domansky, a first-year resident who had his first child earlier this year, says he's interested in pursuing a 4-day work week once he's completed his training. I'm happy to provide exceptional care for my patients and be there for them, but medicine has become more corporatized, he says. Though he's early in his medical career, he's heard plenty of physicians complain about needing to argue with insurance companies to get their patients the treatments they need. Absolutely. And it's disheartening, he says. Residents' work and rest hours have been subject to increasing regulation by the ACGME, whose guidelines state they can work up to 80 hours a week in shifts as long as 24 hours. Yeah, the degree to which that's actually enforced is highly variable, and those regulations are changing. I think when I was in residency, I think the total was maybe up to 30 hours or something. I remember doing like a 32, 33 hour shift, and it was pretty unpleasant. Even the 80-hour weeks, that's on average over a month, which means there can be some weeks that are 90 if some weeks are 70. Many programs do adhere to the 80-hour work week restriction, but many programs don't. And especially if you're going to something like neurosurgery, good luck, you're working 100 hours every week. You're not sticking to 80 hours a week. The silliest argument, the most backwards and short-sighted argument I see from the commitment side is that if you don't have the residents work these insane hours, they're not going to be as well trained. So, okay, cool. Let's assume that were true. Many would prefer you extend residency by an extra year, maybe even 2 years, and let them work more regular hours, not 80 plus hours consistently. But I don't think that's even a valid point, because we have enough data to know that if you want to optimize for learning, that's what residency is about, is helping to train these newly minted MDs to specialize in whatever their specialty is and be able to practice on their own as attending physicians. During that time, therefore, you want to optimize for patient care and learning. So things that do not optimize for patient care and learning would be being sleep deprived, because we know how terrible that is, catastrophic that is for learning, memory consolidation. Well, according to the literature, you will make fewer errors if you're not totally sleep deprived, although when you have more handoffs, like let's say you have an inpatient, right? And you have more handoffs because people are working shorter shifts, there can be errors during handoffs. So the overall error rate is largely the same, but isn't that still better if you have the same number of errors and people are resting better and learning better and better memory consolidation? That's a situation that has upside and no downside. And perhaps the most frustrating part of it is if you wanted to use the argument that 80 hours per week is necessary to train excellent physicians, then have them do doctor things for 80 hours. Why are they doing scout work? Why are they doing nonsense that is completely irrelevant to them practicing as attending physicians? It's because they're cheap labor. And rather than getting the support staff that should be doing that work, it's extra cost to hire those people. So they're like, let's just squeeze more value out of these residents. It's a really toxic way of doing things. Dr. Maria Ansari says they have a different mindset and approach about protecting their personal time, noting that the group she leads have seen a jump in young physicians interested in virtual work. Such hires now account for around 10% of new recruits. She applauds efforts to stop sleep deprivation among doctors, especially since it can lead to medical errors. Yes, medical errors. We have restrictions on pilots and truck drivers regarding how long they can work in a given shift, but for doctors, for physicians, when they're operating, they have someone under the knife, there's no restrictions. It's such backwards logic that is literally just enforced and just motivated by greed. Yet it's harder to replicate her generation's learning experience, she says. A lot of my learning came in the wee hours of the morning and following that patient for 45 hours. A lot of crises can happen after hours. Again, very weak argument. The reason because working fewer hours per week does not mean you are not taking call. It means you're doing fewer call shifts, right? You can still go in at 3 a.m. and not work 100 hours a week, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you're never gonna go in at 3 a.m., but you just don't have to be on call 7 days that week. I remember a week where I was in the hospital. We were on triple call, plastics, face, and hand. And I worked 19-hour days for a full week. Do you think I would learn more doing that or working 12 to 14 hours 5 days a week, and maybe on the 6th day it's 8 hours or whatever? Obviously the latter. Again, we're talking about learning as in learning, retaining information, and then changing your future behavior. And that's going to be more effective when you have proper sleep for memory consolidation. New tech has the potential to promote physician well-being, she says, noting that the 24,000 physicians across all Permanente medical groups were given access to artificial intelligence tools this summer. That is actually going to be really promising because that software can help serve as a scribe. So could help reduce the amount of time charting significantly. That's actually something that is absolutely on the horizon and is being used right now. Dr. Wasnik, a 58-year-old anesthesiologist, says lately he's seen more young doctors seeking 3 or 4 day schedules. It can make covering nights and weekends more difficult, he says, and he and his peers privately wonder if it takes a toll on young practitioners' competency. There is likely a balance there, right? If you're working just 3 days a week and maybe you're working 30 hours or 25 hours or whatever it is, there is a balance there, don't get me wrong. So if you're working only 3 days a week as a young attending physician, you're not going to accelerate your level of care as quickly as if you were working 4 or 5 days. I do agree with that. At the same time, I know someone who does work 4 days a week. The extra time that he saves by not being in the hospital, he still is using to become a better physician. We're both really into longevity, so we're talking about the various tactics that I've covered in the Peter Attia book summary video. You can't really black and white these kinds of arguments. There's a balance point. I don't know where that balance point exactly is. I would argue that if you're working just 3 days a week, then yeah, you probably are not going to be as well-versed and as experienced as someone working 5 days a week. But I don't think that you have to work 5 days a week for the rest of your life. I would say that maybe when you're a younger physician, because you need to build more experience and build that competency more so at that point, and then a few years into your practice, then you can lighten up. That's actually what my buddy did. He was working at a larger group for 5 days a week, and then he went to a different group, worked 4 days a week, and now he's starting his own practice. Still, the father of 4 says he understands where they're coming from. Most of his career, he's regretted becoming a doctor. That's sad. In 24 years, he never called in sick, mainly out of guilt. And you shouldn't feel guilty if you're sick and you need to take time off. That, I would argue, is a very toxic way of framing the idea of doctors coming in, of doctors calling in sick, I should say, because to feel guilty, like you're letting people down when we all acknowledge that if you're sick and you're not optimal, you're not going to be providing optimal care. It sounds like the places he worked and that work culture was highly toxic and manipulative because, again, that's more something driven by money and profits, greed. Now on Reddit, I love that the top comment here is that I don't think that people understand that no work-life balance basically means sleep deprived. When people want work-life balance, they're not saying that, hey, I only want to work 2 hours a day and then I want to go hike and do drugs and party and just chill on my porch. What they're saying is, I want enough time that I can exercise, sleep, and work in a balanced, sustainable way. Medicine having fewer safeguards around fatigue than flying is genuinely ridiculous. This commenter makes an interesting point, which is that surgeons killing people when they're sleep deprived doesn't hurt profit incentive, whereas pilots killing themselves and all their passengers hurts profit incentives. Because if a pilot makes a mistake and it causes a crash and deaths, that's catastrophic for not only the pilot and all the innocent passengers on board, but the image of that airline, their safety record, whether or not more people will want to fly them. Whereas a surgeon is sleep deprived and makes a mistake and causes an injury or a death, that is catastrophic for that patient. And it's not the same level of brand image tarnishing with an airline, right? You're not going to now avoid Stanford Hospital because of that one doctor that was sleep deprived and made this mistake that caused a death. Oh, maybe it was a legitimate mistake. He would have made it even if he wasn't sleep deprived. There's all these kinds of arguments you can make there. That's actually a very interesting point. I think these people would quickly change their tune if they knew the amount of sleep the dude popping open their chest had. And you have the studies now that show sleep deprivation. I think it's like beyond, after 20 hours, you're operating at the equivalent of a BAC of like 0.8. Something like that. Bro is mad because it was finally his turn to start exploiting. You can make that argument if someone's in academia, but if someone's not in academia, you can't really make that argument because they're not working with residents who they're going to be exploiting and taking advantage of. According to multiple stories from older attendings that I've talked to, hospitals used to kiss the feet of physicians that either worked there or utilized their facilities as independent physicians. Now we are cogs with less earning potential, same responsibility, while tacitly equated middies and tied up with insurance bullshit. Why would I give away time for my family and kids having less quality of life with all that, plus having Travis the jerk off with an MBA and mental equivalent of a decayed walnut telling me to do my job? In short, healthcare systems can eat my ass. My time is mine. This guy has a way with words. Don't forget, Travis also makes more than you. Yeah, it's really the pursuit of profits that have eroded a lot of what made being a physician great. And I'm not saying that being a physician isn't great now, but the golden era is behind us. You're not gonna find anyone that would argue that now is the golden era. Things were different in the past, and being a physician is still a great job, don't get me wrong. It's not perfect, but things have certainly changed, and some for the better, but many for the worse as well. I don't get why older docs would be against this. If I missed my child's wedding, then so should you. But overall, this would help eliminate mistakes and give better care. I think that's exactly why some people are against the work-life balance. They had to suffer, so they only see it as fair if the generations that come after suffer as well. I think that is definitely part of the story. It's people that have done the hard thing in the past, thinking that they did it, and we have this bias when we look back to think that things aren't as bad as they actually were, which is why you see all these. You see the med students say how pre-med was so easy. You see the residents say how being a med student was so easy. You see the attendings who say that being a resident wasn't that bad. There is this very strong and common bias to say, looking back, the hard times, the challenges weren't as bad. And part of that could be a great coping mechanism, right? It could be you being the author of your own story, and I'm not against any of those things. I do think it's very misleading, though, when you constantly downplay the difficulty of something because of this bias. Of note, half of the boomer docs in this article sold their practices to PE, private equity, classic boomer ladder pulling, and then blaming younger folks for their own greed. Private equity is in the pursuit of profit, and as we've already discussed, the pursuit of profit is largely an issue when it comes to the direction healthcare is moving. Ooh, good counterpoint here. People don't realize work-life balance in medicine means a 40 to 60 hour work week. They thought it meant 20 to 30 hour work weeks. That's a good counterpoint, which is, if someone does think it's 20 to 30 hours, then that's extremely unreasonable. 40 to 60 is the norm. My understanding of this is it's oftentimes in residency that people are complaining about lifestyle work-life balance. A lot of my friends who are attending physicians now are designing their practices or choosing jobs in a way that aligns with what they want. Some people want to work harder, put in more hours, make a little bit more money, cool. Whereas other friends want to work 4 days a week, or they like the gig of being a hospitalist and so on. That's a part of it probably, coupled with the glamorous life of the Instagram work-life balance reels, showing people just never working, makes it look like no one actually has to work other than us, when in reality, no one lives those lives on Instagram, and physicians can find balance. I feel the amount of work I do to my lifestyle is well above that of my peers I grew up with now. I do like this counterpoint. Social media and Instagram, I've spoken about this in previous videos, they tend to have a highlight reel and only show you the good and upplay, like, look at me in my fresh, crisp white coat and my super designer fit scrubs, and life's amazing, being a doctor is great, and they don't tell you the reality. The truth is always in the gray. There's nuance there. So we strive to do that with Med School Insiders, the So You Want to Be series, and of course our other videos, as well as on this channel, the Why I Didn't and Day in the Life series. They're all about showing you guys, the pre-meds, what is and is not realistic about being a doctor. We're gonna finish up with this post from Nisha Mehta on LinkedIn. The issue is not that newer generations of physicians are entitled millennials who don't want to work 60 hours a week. It's that what used to make these hours sustainable has changed with shifts in physician demographics and the pressures of practicing in today's healthcare landscape. Doctors have always worked hard. That's always been the job. Her father's a cardiologist. He literally would record bedtime stories on tape because on any given day, there was a high percentage chance he wouldn't be home. However, there were some key differences in my dad's career which allowed him to focus more on the heart of medicine, which we all love so much. Admin tasks. He didn't spend 2+ hours a night charting. When he was home, he was present. Demographics. 70 to 80% of female physicians, who make up over half of currently matriculated medical students, more than 50% of med students are women, are married to other high-income professionals. A large percentage of male physicians are also in dual-income families now. Autonomy. As a private practice owner, he was seen as the head of the healthcare chain and didn't have to fight with insurance companies, people who knew less than him about his patients, or legal overreach to provide the healthcare his patients needed. Joy. spent his time being a physician. When I'd go to the mall as a teenager, friends took bets on how long it would take before one of my dad's patients came up to me and asked about my latest tennis match or debate tournament. To this day, every throw blanket in my parents' house is knitted by a patient. Joy in medicine is about that doctor-patient relationship, and we've got to get back to it, or physicians will have to look outside of doctoring for their sources of joy. The point is, for career longevity, physicians have got to have daily reminders of what they love about medicine. It can't be all the pressure to do more with less resources. People taking advantage of altruism, and people telling them how to do their jobs. Do we need to change the culture of medicine? Yes. But also, let doctors be doctors, and you'll see how many of them happily work 60 hours a week. That is an excellent, excellent post right there. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know with a comment down below. Much love, my friends, and I'll see you all in the next one.